I work at Auckland International Airport in the biosecurity division. That's a fancy way of saying I get paid to watch Americans argue with reality for 8 hours a day. Last Tuesday, a woman from San Diego stood in front of me holding a half-eaten apple from her flight, 3 unwrapped sandwiches, a bag of California trail mix, and what appeared to be an entire rotisserie chicken wrapped in aluminum foil. When I explained that New Zealand has some of the strictest biosecurity laws on the planet and she couldn't bring any of it into the country, she looked at me like I just told her gravity was a hoax. But it's organic, she said, as if that magic word would somehow override our entire agricultural protection system. It's from Whole Foods. I paid $19 for this chicken. I explained that price point doesn't change biosecurity risk. She then pulled out her phone and started Googling New Zealand apple laws conspiracy, right there at my counter. Found some Reddit thread from 2019 claiming our fruit inspections were just a cash grab to boost local farmers. She showed me the thread, it had 11 upvotes, and demanded I explain why her internet research contradicted our so-called regulations. I told her she could either surrender the items or pay for them to be professionally treated and shipped to her accommodation. The treatment would cost more than her entire food haul. She chose to create a 40-minute scene instead, during which she cited the International Treaty of Food Transport, threatened to call her congressman, and eventually threw the apple at the disposal bin so hard it exploded on impact. The chicken remained clutched in her hand throughout. She left New Zealand without it, muttering about authoritarian governments and how this would have never happened in Hawaii. That's actually a relatively normal Tuesday. You want to know the really wild part? We have an entire database of confiscated items. There's a wall in our break room with photos. Current record holder, an American man who tried to bring in 14 pounds of beef jerky, 6 bags of trail mix containing prohibited seeds, a cooler full of ice cream that had melted and refrozen 3 times, and I'm not making this up, a live succulent plant he'd rescued from a California Whole Foods because he didn't trust New Zealand plants to be as healthy. The succulent incident triggered a level 3 biosecurity response. We had to get specialists involved. But New Zealand is just one airport. Let me tell you what I hear from my colleagues around the world, because Americans have somehow turned international customs into an extreme sport where the only prize is deportation and the eternal confusion of underpaid government employees. I have a friend who works biosecurity at Brisbane Airport in Australia. She once had an American couple who'd been traveling through Asia for 3 weeks. They'd collected hiking boots covered in soil from 4 different countries, unwashed camping gear, several bags of dried fruits and nuts from markets in Thailand and Vietnam, and a hand-carved wooden statue from Bali that still had bark attached. When she flagged every single item for quarantine inspection or disposal, the husband, wearing a UCLA t-shirt, said, and I quote, "But Australia is basically America. We're both English-speaking countries with kangaroos and stuff. Why would you have different rules?" My friend had to explain that Australia is its own sovereign nation with its own ecosystem, and that being English-speaking doesn't create a biological force field against foreign pests. He responded by asking if they could just FedEx the stuff to their hotel, as if quarantine laws had a loophole for American shipping companies. His wife chimed in that they'd done research and knew Australia was super chill and outdoorsy, so they figured the rules would be relaxed. The research, it turned out, was a 3-year-old travel blog that mentioned Sydney's beaches. The real kicker? They'd watched the entire Border Security, Australia's frontline TV show on the plane. Watched actual episodes of people getting fined for bringing in undeclared food. And still somehow concluded it wouldn't apply to them because, and this was their exact reasoning, those people on the show seemed like they were trying to hide stuff, but we're being honest about it. As if Australian biosecurity laws had a character witness clause. Here's what happened. They refused treatment, refused disposal, and insisted on speaking to someone more senior who could explain the real rules. They got escalated 3 times. Each officer explained the same thing. Each time, they responded with increasing certainty that this was all a misunderstanding and surely someone higher up would understand that they were Americans and had good intentions. The wooden statue alone required 2 hours of inspection because of potential wood-boring insects. They missed their connection. Cost them $800 to rebook. They left reviews on TripAdvisor claiming Australian customs targets Americans and makes up rules that aren't on the official website. They are, in fact, extremely prominently displayed on the official website, which has a search function specifically for American travelers. Then there's what happened at Tokyo Narita last month. My colleague Yuki sent me photos. An American businessman tried to bring in a suitcase containing 45 protein bars, 6 jars of peanut butter, 2 packages of beef jerky, and, inexplicably, a 3-pound bag of California rice. All of it undeclared. When asked why he didn't declare any food items on his customs form, he said he didn't think supplements and snacks counted as real food, and besides, Japan and America both have McDonald's, so obviously the food safety standards were identical. Yuki explained that Japan prohibits most meat and dairy products from entering the country without proper documentation. The man responded by explaining that he was on a specialized diet and couldn't possibly survive on Japanese food for his 4-day business trip. He then suggested that perhaps Japan should update their import laws to accommodate modern nutritional science. When Yuki remained unmoved, he tried to prove the protein bars were safe by eating one in front of her, as if a live demonstration of non-toxicity would override agricultural import law. He then offered to sign a waiver accepting full responsibility for any diseases his American beef jerky might introduce to the Japanese food supply. The entire situation escalated when he started photographing the customs process, claiming he was documenting evidence of discrimination for his lawyer. Japan has extremely strict laws about photographing customs areas. Security had to get involved. His phone was examined for about 30 minutes while he stood there insisting this was a violation of his First Amendment right. He could not be convinced that the U.S. Constitution doesn't apply at Tokyo Narita Airport. He eventually surrendered the food after a 2-hour ordeal but left claiming he'd be contacting the U.S. Embassy about Japan's hostile business environment and how this incident proved Japan wasn't really ready for international commerce. My friend Sarah works customs at Dubai International Airport. Last year, an American woman arrived with a carry-on bag containing 68 loose pills of various colors, all mixed together in a single Ziploc bag. No labels, no prescription, no documentation whatsoever. When asked what they were for, she said, "Oh, you know, just my regular medications." Sarah asked her to be specific. The woman started listing things. "There's some ibuprofen, probably some Tylenol, definitely my cholesterol meds, I think there's some melatonin, maybe some of my husband's blood pressure pills. He didn't need all of them. Some cold medicine, and like vitamins and stuff." Sarah explained that the UAE has extremely strict medication import laws, that many common American over-the-counter medications are controlled substances in the Emirates, and that bringing unlabeled pills in a plastic bag with zero documentation was essentially the worst possible way to transport medication internationally. The woman's response was to argue that this was how she always traveled, that she'd been to like 6 or 7 countries this way, and surely Dubai of all places would understand because it's so modern and international. Sarah pulled up the UAE Ministry of Health website on her computer and started cross-referencing. Several of the pills the woman described, assuming she was even correctly identifying them, contained codeine or pseudoephedrine, which require pre-approval from UAE authorities. The woman insisted this was impossible because they're just over the counter in America, and besides, she'd bought most of them at Costco, so they were definitely legitimate. She then explained that she didn't bring the bottles because they took up too much space in her luggage, and she'd seen a travel hack on Instagram about removing pills from their packaging to save room. The Instagram hack, naturally, didn't mention that most countries require medication to be in original labeled containers with documentation. The woman became increasingly agitated, eventually declaring that this was ridiculous because Dubai had huge pharmacies in the airport and she could just buy more there, so obviously the UAE wasn't really serious about medication control. Sarah explained that airport pharmacies and medication import laws serve different purposes. The woman demanded to speak to a supervisor, insisting there must be an express lane for Americans with connecting flights. What made it truly spectacular? She eventually admitted that several of the pills were actually supplements from a multi-level marketing company. She'd brought them to give as gifts to her Dubai hosts because she was helping them get healthy. The supplements contained ingredients not approved for sale in the UAE. She couldn't understand why the UAE wouldn't want access to cutting-edge American wellness technology and suggested that maybe their laws were just protecting local pharmacy companies from competition. Then there's the German customs officer I met at a conference in Berlin. He told me about an American tourist who arrived at Munich airport with a giant duffel bag containing 14 different prescription medications, only 3 of which had legible labels. When asked for prescriptions or documentation, the man said his doctor had written everything down, but he'd left the papers at home because who brings paperwork on vacation? He explained that he had multiple chronic conditions and needed all the medications, but he couldn't actually remember which pills were which, so he was just taking a bunch of different ones each day and seeing what worked. The officer explained that Germany requires proper documentation for prescription medication imports and that taking random combinations of pills without medical supervision was dangerous. The man responded by explaining that he was an American and we handle our own healthcare, that his insurance company didn't cover international consultations, and besides, he'd been managing his conditions this way for months and felt fine. When the officer suggested he visit a German doctor to get proper prescriptions, the man said that seemed like a lot of bureaucracy, and wouldn't German efficiency be better served by just letting him through? He then pivoted to arguing that the EU's medication regulations were behind America's and that most of his pills were probably available over the counter in Germany anyway under different names. He offered to show the officer photos on his phone of the original prescription bottles from home, as if photographs constituted legal documentation. When that didn't work, he suggested that perhaps the officer could just Google the pills to verify they were legitimate. He could not be convinced that German customs officers do not diagnose medical conditions or verify prescriptions via Google image search. The situation concluded with him agreeing to have the medications held at customs until he could produce proper documentation, which meant visiting a German doctor, explaining his entire medical history to a stranger, and hoping they'd write equivalent prescriptions. He left a 1-star review on Google Maps about Munich airport claiming their customs process was designed to force Americans into the socialized medicine system and that this was probably illegal under international trade law. Here's one from my own experience that still keeps me up at night. An American couple came through Auckland with $12,000 in cash, rubber banded together in stacks in a Nike shoebox at the bottom of a suitcase. They hadn't declared it. New Zealand requires declaration of anything over 10,000 NZD. When our scanners flagged the currency, I asked them about it. They seemed genuinely confused about why I was asking. "It's our money," the husband said, as if that answered everything. I explained that currency over a certain amount must be declared when entering New Zealand. The wife responded, "But why? It's not like we're buying anything illegal. It's just cash for our vacation." I explained that cash declaration laws exist for multiple reasons, including anti-money laundering regulations, tax purposes, and tracking capital flows. They looked at each other like I was explaining quantum physics. The husband then said, "But we're Americans. We're allowed to travel with our own money." I clarified that yes, they're absolutely allowed to travel with any amount of money, they just have to declare it. He responded by asking what would happen if they declared it. I said nothing would happen except we'd make a note of it and they'd continue on their way. He asked why they should declare it if nothing happens. I explained it's a legal requirement. He said it seemed like a waste of everyone's time if nothing happens anyway. Then things got weird. The wife asked if we were going to take their money. I assured her we absolutely were not taking their money, we just needed them to complete a declaration form. She asked why we needed a form if we weren't taking anything. Her husband chimed in that this felt like government overreach and started explaining that in America, you can travel with cash freely and this kind of tracking seemed kind of communist, actually. I pulled up New Zealand's customs website on my tablet and showed them the cash declaration requirements, clearly stated in English, with an entire FAQ section. The husband studied it for about 30 seconds and then said, "Yeah, but who actually does this? Like, really?" I told him everyone is legally required to do it. He responded, "But who checks?" As if the answer wasn't self-evident from the current situation. The wife then asked if they could just declare half to stay under the limit. I explained that's called structuring and is actually more illegal than just not declaring at all. She couldn't understand how splitting their own money could be more illegal than not reporting it. Her husband suggested maybe they could declare it next time when they left New Zealand, implying that declaration laws worked on a 2-for-1 basis or could be handled retroactively. At this point, I had to explain that failure to declare currency is a serious offense with significant fines. They both became immediately defensive, insisting they didn't know about the rules. The husband's exact words, "How are we supposed to know New Zealand has its own money rules? You use dollars. We use dollars. It's basically the same thing." I had to clarify that New Zealand uses New Zealand dollars, which are a different currency, and that every country has its own financial regulations regardless of what their currency is called. This was apparently brand new information. They ultimately received a written warning and had to fill out the delayed declaration form, but not before the husband asked if there was an American exception for first-time mistakes and whether this was going to affect our ESDA. Last month I processed an American who'd flown to Auckland intending to stay for 6 weeks, work remotely for his US company, and maybe do some freelance consulting on the side with a New Zealand business he'd connected with on LinkedIn. He had a tourist visa. When I asked about his work plans, he said, "Oh, it's remote work so it doesn't count. I'm not taking a New Zealand job." I explained that remote work on a tourist visa is still work, and the consulting would definitely require a work visa. He was absolutely stunned. "But I'm working for an American company," he said. "New Zealand doesn't benefit at all, so why would you care?" I explained that visa categories aren't based on who benefits but on what activities you're performing while in the country. He responded, "But I could just lie and say I'm on vacation and you'd never know, right? So why are we even having this conversation?" I clarified that we were having this conversation specifically because he'd told the truth, and now that I knew he was planning to work, I couldn't unknow it. He asked if he could take it back and restart the conversation. I explained that immigration doesn't work with rewind buttons. He then pivoted to arguing that remote work has blurred the definitions of work and tourism, and surely New Zealand's visa laws hadn't caught up yet with digital nomad culture. I showed him the section on our immigration website specifically addressing remote work. It was last updated 3 months ago. His final argument was that he'd already paid for 6 weeks of accommodation and had meetings scheduled with the New Zealand business. Surely we could make a one-time exception rather than making him waste all that money. I explained that immigration law doesn't have provisions for refunding your poor planning. He left on the next flight back to LAX, convinced that New Zealand was behind the times on remote work and that our visa system needed to modernize for the digital age. I've been working airport customs for 11 years now. I've processed travelers from every nation on Earth. But there's something uniquely fascinating about Americans at customs. It's not that they're the only people who make mistakes, everyone does. It's the specific type of mistake delivered with the unwavering confidence that surely, somehow, there's been a misunderstanding and we'll all laugh about it once we get the supervisor. Last week, a woman from Phoenix tried to convince me that the U.S. State Department should have warned her about New Zealand's biosecurity laws in more obvious ways. I pulled up the official State Department travel advisory for New Zealand on her phone. There's an entire section on biosecurity. She read it, then looked at me and said, "Okay, but who actually reads all of that?" I told her that most people who want to bring food into strict biosecurity countries do, in fact, read the regulations. She said that seemed like victim blaming. The thing is, every country has customs regulations. Every airport has rules. Every nation has the sovereign right to control what crosses its borders. These aren't secrets. They're not hidden. They're incredibly well documented, available in multiple languages, announced repeatedly during flights, posted on signs, printed on arrival cards, and readily accessible via any internet search. But somehow, some Americans arrive at foreign customs with the unshakable belief that the rules must not apply to them, or don't actually exist, or are negotiable, or can be overridden with enough explanation of how inconvenient they are. The pattern is always the same. Initial confusion, then explanation, then escalation to, "This is ridiculous." Then threats of calling various American authorities who have no jurisdiction, then usually capitulation while muttering about how this country is crazy and America would never do this. And in the background of all of this, we customs officers are just sitting here with our stamps and forms and databases, watching someone try to argue away the basic concept of national borders with the confidence of a person who's never once had to think about where their country ends and another begins. So please, American travelers, read the customs regulations. Declare your items. Understand that "I'm American" is not a legal category in anyone else's country. Your passport is incredibly powerful and grants you visa-free access to more places than most nationalities could dream of, but it is not a golden ticket to ignore local laws. Your good intentions don't override biosecurity science. Your expensive organic chicken is still a biohazard. Your Instagram travel hack about removing pills from bottles is how you end up detained at Dubai Customs. And no, the US Embassy cannot help you because you brought an undeclared apple to New Zealand. We're not targeting you. We're not making up rules. We're just doing our jobs. And if you'd spend half the energy reading the customs declaration that you spend arguing with me, we'd all get to go home earlier. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's an American in Terminal 3 who's absolutely certain that California-grown avocados should be exempt from Australian quarantine because they're superfood and actually healthier than Australian avocados, and I need to go explain the concept of fruit flies before this escalates into another 40-minute produce lecture. Welcome to international travel. Please declare your food.